When it comes to drug offenses in federal court, the amount of time that an individual is facing is really driven by the sentencing guidelines. Now, mandatory minimums can also apply. For example, if this is an importation of more than 5 grams of methamphetamine, an individual is looking at 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. And if we're talking about 50 grams of methamphetamine, then we're talking about a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence. Meaning the judge's hands will literally be tied and he will not be able to sentence you under the mandatory minimum unless you can get under the mandatory minimum in some of the ways that are possible. For example, safety valve. I have a video on safety valve that explains exactly how to get under the mandatory minimum, and I will link it above here, so I encourage you to watch that video first. It even discusses how the First Step Act changed the way we look at safety valve in the last 2 years. Now in this video, I will be discussing what's called minor role. And this is another way that my clients are looking at less time when I argue on their behalf that they deserve what's called minor role or minor participant. Minor role reduction is not a defense to a crime, meaning that it only applies when an individual has pled guilty to a drug crime or they went to trial and lost. Of course, if you win a trial, you're acquitted and the case simply goes away. In this video, I will be discussing 2 things about minor role. 1, how it applies and changes your guidelines, and number 2, what exactly do you need to show even to get minor role. First, let's take a look how the guidelines change depending if you get minor role or if you don't. Now, if you're charged with a drug offense in federal court, you will have to take a look at section 2D1.1 of the sentencing guidelines. That's the section that tells us exactly the amount of time that a person faces in drug offenses. Now, to determine the base offense level, which is the level that you start at, you will have to take a look at table C in the same section. There, all the quantities of narcotics are listed, and it tells you what's the base offense level depending on the drug. Now, if you're charged in the Southern District of California, here in San Diego, I will use level 38 as your base offense level. Now, of course, it doesn't necessarily apply to your case, but I will use it as an example because many of my clients will find themselves at this level. We're a border district, meaning that we have a border next to Mexico, and we have large quantities of narcotics that come into our country through this section of the border. So you'll start off with base offense level 38. Now, I have a video that deals with safety valve. If you're eligible for safety valve, you will receive 2 levels off of the guidelines. Now, if you plead guilty or accept responsibility, you'll receive 2 or 3 levels off. And then if you're in the Southern District of California, here in San Diego, and depending, maybe there's other districts that also give this encouragement, but we have what's called fast track. If you go through the case quicker, the prosecutor will encourage you to go quicker because of the amount and volume of the cases that we have in our district. And if you plead guilty quicker, you will receive 4 levels off. If you do the math, you will come up to section to level 29, 87 to 108 months. Now let's take a look how that changes if you argue for minor role. One of the bigger changes you'll see is that your base offense level will change according to section 2D1.1. If you're level 38, it will become level 34. You will still get all the same reductions that you did before. And of course, you will receive the minor role. Now, if you look, that's a 6-level difference between minor role and not getting minor role. This brings you to level 23, 46 to 57 months. Now, the months that I'm using come from category 1, meaning that my client, in this example, I'm assuming that my client is in category 1, criminal history category, meaning that he has no criminal history or he has only 1 criminal history point. If you have priors, the calculations will change and you will have to take a look at the guidelines and determine where exactly you land on the table. Now, something I forgot to mention. If you look at the guidelines, the months here on the board, if you're eligible for safety valve and you can get under the mandatory minimum, the guidelines themselves are no longer mandatory. They're advisory, meaning that the judge will calculate them first, but he can sentence you to more time or less than whatever's in the guidelines. That's why having a good lawyer is important even at sentencing. Even if you plead guilty to a crime, this is where the argument is going to be. Do you deserve less than 46 months, even if that's the low end of the guidelines? Of course you do. And if you have a good lawyer, you'll be able to bring good arguments in front of the judge. This brings us to the second point in this video. How do you get minor role? Now, something to remember. Minor role will be determined on the facts, meaning that your attorney needs to do a good job writing a brief and arguing well at sentencing in order for you to get minor role. Here's the things that he'll need to show. The degree to which defendant understood the scope and structure of criminal activity, the degree to which the defendant participated in planning or organizing the criminal activity, the degree to which the defendant exercised decision-making authority or influenced the exercise of decision-making authority, the nature and extent of defendant's participation in commission of the crime, including the acts that he performed and the responsibilities that he had, the degree to which defendant stood to benefit from criminal activity. For example, if the crime is importing methamphetamine across the international border, something we see a lot here in the Southern District of California, here in San Diego, your attorney should do a good job arguing exactly those 5 factors. 1, that you didn't plan the activity, you didn't know the other members of the cartel, you didn't know who packaged the drugs and how they placed it in your vehicle. You weren't going to receive a bunch of money for the transportation. For example, you were getting $500 and not a portion of the proceeds once the drugs were being sold. If all of those things are true, the less you did, the easier it is for your attorney to argue for minor role. If you enjoyed this video, please click like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button so next time I post, you'll be first to know.